The envelope slid across the table so smoothly you would have thought they had practiced it. Maybe they had. My wife's father pushed it toward me with 2 fingers and a smile so thin it barely counted. "Open it," he said. "It's better for everyone if we handle this like adults." My wife, Serena, didn't look surprised. That was the part one remember most. Not the envelope. Not the steak growing cold between us. Not her mother sitting there with that look rich people wear when they think kindness is something they can outsource. It was Serena's face. Calm. Prepared. Almost relieved. I looked down at the envelope, then back at my wife. "What is this?" She lifted her wine glass without meeting my eyes. "A practical solution." I opened it. Inside was a private agreement already typed up by some expensive lawyer. Clean language. Sharp edges. In short, they were offering me money to disappear quietly from Serena's life before her public promotion made our marriage complicated. There it was. My worth, printed on thick cream paper. A man they thought lived too simply, dressed too plainly, dreamed too small. A husband they had spent 3 years politely insulting at dinners, birthdays, and holidays. A man Serena had begun correcting in public with that soft little laugh she used when she wanted people to know I was harmless. I read the last page once. Then I folded it carefully and set it beside my plate. Because none of them, not Serena, not her parents, not the attorney who drafted it, had the slightest idea whose signature actually controlled the company naming its next CEO. And 2 minutes later, her father made the mistake that ended all 4 of our lives as we knew them. My name is Adrian Vale. I was 39 that night, and for the last 4 years, I had been married to a woman who thought simplicity was the same thing as lack. That misunderstanding had protected me for a long time. Serena met me at a charity arts fundraiser in Bellevue, back when I was still rebuilding the company I had quietly acquired from the ruins of a logistics software firm everyone else had written off. I never led with money. Never saw the point. My father spent his life teaching me that the loudest man in a room was usually compensating for an emptiness no one had named yet. So I drove an older car. Wore decent watches, not flashy ones. Lived in the house I had bought before my first real windfall and kept most of my assets layered through trusts, holding entities, and boards that preferred privacy over applause. Serena hated all of that. Not at first. At first she called it refreshing. Said I felt grounded, safe, mature. But once she entered the executive track at Halcyon Dynamics, admiration slowly turned into embarrassment. She began comparing me to husbands who played bigger. Men with visible status. Men who posted acquisitions online and treated restaurants like stages. She never knew Halcyon was mine. Officially, I wasn't the public face. I had structured it that way on purpose after a brutal takeover battle 3 years earlier. The company had a board, a chairman, a CEO search committee, layers of distance. My name existed in places that mattered, not places that trended. And 6 weeks before that dinner, Serena had been informed she was the leading internal candidate for CEO. That was when her tone changed completely. She stopped speaking to me like a partner. And started speaking to me like a liability. Looking back, the signs had been there for months. Serena started editing me. Not my character. My presentation. She wanted different jackets. Different shoes. Different friends. She said it lightly, always with that polished executive smile, but the message never changed. I was acceptable in private, embarrassing in rooms that mattered. Then came the invitations I was suddenly discouraged from attending. Board-adjacent dinners. Industry receptions. Holiday events where spouses were welcome, but somehow I was always told the seating would be tight, or the guest list was mostly strategic. Once, I arrived at one of her networking events after she insisted it would be meaningless, and I watched her introduce another executive's husband as exactly the kind of partner who understands visibility. She said that with me standing 3 feet away. I said nothing. That was my mistake. Silence teaches the wrong people that you agree with them. 2 weeks before the dinner with her parents, I found the first real crack in the performance. Serena had left her tablet open in the study. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a charger. But her email was open, and a message from her mother sat at the top of the screen. If Adrian won't step aside quietly, your father knows a firm that handles these things discreetly. You cannot become CEO with that man attached to your image. I read it twice. Then 3 times. Not because it shocked me. Because it confirmed something colder than betrayal. This wasn't frustration. It was strategy. And by the time Serena invited me to dinner that Friday, I already knew they weren't gathering to eat. Her father made the mistake exactly 1 minute and 40 seconds after I put the envelope back on the table. He leaned back, adjusted his cufflinks and said, "You should be grateful we're doing this privately. Once Serena takes over as CEO, Men like you become inconvenient. Men like you. Not unsuccessful men. Not poor men. Invisible men. Disposable men. Serena still said nothing. Her mother cut into her fillet like she was watching a problem being professionally removed. And in that moment something inside me went completely still. Not broken. Not angry. So. I looked at Serena and asked very quietly, "How long have you known about this?" She finally met my eyes. "Long enough to know this is best." Best. There's something almost elegant about betrayal when the person doing it believes they're being reasonable. I nodded once as if I needed time to absorb the insult. In reality, I was measuring every expression at that table, filing it away, deciding who had led this and who had simply enjoyed it. Then Serena's father delivered the second mistake. "If you sign tonight," he said, tapping the envelope, "we'll make sure the company never hears that you've been unstable, dependent, and living off your wife while she built a real future." That was the sentence that changed the room. Not visibly for them. For me. Because now it wasn't just contempt. It was coercion. A threat wrapped in polished language. I reached for my glass, took one slow sip of water, and said the only thing any of them were prepared to hear from a man they thought had already lost. "Fair enough." Serena exhaled. Her mother relaxed. Her father smiled. And across the white tablecloth, hidden beneath my folded hand, my phone vibrated once with a message from the chairman of Halcyon's board. "Need your final decision on the CEO appointment tonight." I didn't answer the chairman right away. I let the phone sit against my palm while Serena's father pushed a pen toward me like he was closing a minor real estate deal. The agreement was simple on the surface. Confidential separation, financial compensation, no public dispute, no claim on Serena's future reputation. Clean language. Expensive cruelty. I skimmed it once more, then looked at Serena. "Is this really what you want?" I asked. It was the last opening I gave her. Not because I was weak. Because once I moved, I intended to move cleanly. Serena folded her napkin and placed it beside her plate. "I want a life that fits where I'm going." There it was. Not love gone cold. Ambition without memory. I signed nothing. Instead, I placed the agreement back in the envelope and said, "Then I won't make this harder for you." Her father actually chuckled. He thought surrender had a sound and he was hearing it. I stood, buttoned my jacket, thanked them for dinner, and walked out before any of them could say something memorable enough to ruin the elegance of what they believed they had accomplished. The second I reached the valet stand, I called the chairman. "Adrian," he said, "we need to finalize tonight. Serena's supporters are pushing hard." I looked back through the restaurant glass. 4 silhouettes at the table. Serena already leaning toward her parents, no doubt discussing the man they believed they had just buried. "Take her out of consideration," I said. A beat of silence. Then, "Understood." "And the internal review?" "Started at 8 a.m., I said. "Full communications pull. Off books if necessary." Because Serena had mistaken privacy for power. And by morning I intended to show her the difference. I barely slept that night. Not because I doubted the decision. Because betrayal has a strange way of making even the obvious feel unreal once the room goes quiet. At 7:40 the next morning, I was in a private conference suite on the 42nd floor of Halcyon's headquarters, watching the city come awake through a wall of glass Serena had only ever seen from lower levels. The chairman arrived first. Then outside counsel. Then the head of compliance. No one wasted words. The board had already approved the internal review framework before midnight. All they needed from me was permission to widen it. They got it. At 8:03, compliance began pulling Serena's company communications, executive expense submissions, hiring recommendations, and deleted message recoveries linked to the CEO selection cycle. By 9:15 the first problem surfaced. By 9:42, it became a pattern. She hadn't just hidden me. She had used me. Multiple internal messages showed Serena presenting herself as effectively unattached, socially unencumbered, and free to represent the brand without domestic drag. In one exchange with a board influence consultant, she described her husband as a temporary personal complication that will be resolved before the transition is public. Temporary. That word did more damage than any insult from her father. Then came the second discovery. 3 expense entries routed through an executive discretionary account had paid a law firm retainer, the same firm that drafted the envelope shoved across the dinner table. She had used company-linked resources to prepare her private disposal of me. And by 10:11 a.m., the board no longer saw Serena as a CEO candidate. They saw exposure. At 11:30, Serena was told the CEO vote had been postponed. At 11:47 she was asked to report to an internal review meeting. At 12:06 she learned the meeting was not about strategy. It was about her. I watched none of it in person. That was deliberate. Humiliation is noisy when people perform it live. I wanted facts, not theater. So I stayed in the conference suite while counsel brought updates in measured, quiet intervals, each one cleaner than anger. Serena denied everything first, then minimized, then reframed. That was apparently how she handled pressure, same way she handled me. Reduced the moral weight, renamed the damage, act offended that anyone noticed. But documents don't bruise when you push them. They don't cry when you lie. They just sit there and remain true. By early afternoon, the board had formally removed her from CEO consideration and suspended her pending full review for misuse of company resources, disclosure concerns, and conduct inconsistent with executive fiduciary standards. Her access was restricted before the meeting even ended. Strategy files, building credentials, all cut in sequence. Then her father called me. No greeting, no dignity, just rage. "What have you done?" he demanded. I let the silence breathe one full second before answering. "What you taught your daughter," I said, "is that image matters more than character. This is just image meeting reality." He threatened lawyers. I almost smiled. Because men like him always believe money can still control a room after truth enters it. An hour later, Serena finally called. For the first time in 3 years, her voice had no polish in it. Only panic. And when I answered, she said the one line I knew meant the ground had finally opened beneath her. "Adrian, who are you?" I looked out at the skyline from the 42nd floor and answered her with the truth she had spent years training herself not to see. "I'm the man you kept underestimating." She started crying then. Not softly. Not with grace. With the raw, shocked grief of someone who had mistaken access for ownership and suddenly discovered every door in the building had belonged to someone else all along. "Adrian, please," she said. "I didn't know." That, I told her, was the entire problem. By close of business, the board had appointed an interim CEO and authorized a full ethics review. Serena's suspension became formal by evening. Her father's law firm sent a threatening letter before dinner. Outside counsel answered it before dessert. The company's funds had not been used for governance, retention, or strategy. They had been used to quietly prepare the removal of a spouse she considered damaging to her public image. There was no elegant interpretation left. 3 weeks later, Serena resigned. The resignation was framed as personal. Most corporate lies are. I ended the marriage 2 months after that, privately and without spectacle. She asked to meet once before it was final. I agreed, mostly so I would never have to wonder whether I had imagined any part of her. I hadn't. She sat across from me in a quiet hotel lounge, smaller somehow, stripped of the authority she used to wear like perfume. She asked if I had ever loved her. I told her yes. She asked when I stopped. I held her gaze and said, "The night your family put a price on my absence and you let them." Last week, Halcyon announced its new CEO. It wasn't Serena. And for the first time in years, neither was my silence mistaken for weakness.